The next book was different. It was bound in a material I couldn't recognize, a dark, cool substance that felt like solidified night. It held the story of a girl named Isolde. In her real life, she was a seamstress. She was known for her beautiful, precise work, her stitches so fine they were almost invisible. Her life was one of careful, steady work. But in the book, she was an architect, not of buildings, but of shadows. The moment of divergence was a moonless night. She was stitching a black dress, and the shadows in her room seemed to take on a life of their own. She put down her needle and thread and began to manipulate them. She created houses with walls, made of starlight and roofs of deep shadow. She built cities that shifted with the angle of the moon, streets that appeared and disappeared with the setting sun. Her unwritten life was a world of impermanence, of fleeting beauty. Her sculptures were gone with the dawn, but they were less real for their brief existence. She was an architect of the things that are not meant to last. Her life was one of solitude. She never had a home that stayed the same for more than a night. She lived in the open, her only tools her hands, and the moonlight. She never had a husband, never had children. Her unwritten life was a lonely one, but a beautiful one. It was a life of pure art, a single, brilliant flame that burned brightly for a short time and then was gone. When I closed the book, a small, dark stone, its surface smooth and cool, rested on the cover. I put it in my pocket, the strange weight of familiar comfort. I felt it then. The quiet, growing hum of the library, the voice of the library itself. It was speaking to me, a silent song that had been building with every book I read. I knew, with a sudden, cold certainty, that the next book I read would be my own. I went to the center of the room, to a pedestal that I had never noticed before. A single unbound manuscript sat on it, its pages blank. I touched the first page, and the words began to appear, as if written by an unseen hand. It told the story of a boy lost in the woods with no memory and no name. It was my story. It was the only story I knew. But then the pages began to fill with what-ifs. A life where I didn't find the library. A life where I was found by a family. Who gave me a name and a past that wasn't mine. A life where I grew up to be a quiet, unremarkable man. A stranger in my own skin. My unwritten life was one of quiet desperation. I was a man who felt like a ghost, a hollow vessel walking through a life that wasn't his. The book told me of a life of quiet melancholy, of a man who spent his days looking at the stars, wondering where he came from. My hands, which had so far only held the lives of others, trembled as I turned the pages. Then I saw it. On every page, a small familiar image. A perfect, detailed drawing of a spider web. And then a small piece of sea glass, and a broken silver gear, and a baker's thumbprint, and a dark stone. My unwritten life wasn't about a life I could have lived. It was about a life I was already living. My memories weren't lost. They were unwritten. I was a person who was not yet fully formed. I was the person who was waiting for all these other people to live their lives, so I could finally begin to live my own. I turned the last page of the manuscript, and the words appeared. The story is not done. It has just begun. I looked down at my hands. They were not the hands of a woodcutter, or a baker, or an architect. They were the hands of a storyteller. My life was not about finding my own past. It was about giving a future to the others. I was the keeper of the unwritten lives, the one who listened to their quiet songs and gave them a voice. The river stone, the sea glass, the gear, they were not just memories. They were seeds. And my life was the garden where they would finally grow. The hum in the library grew to a roar. The bookshelves began to glow with a faint inner light. The unwritten lives were not just stories anymore. They were possibilities. They were waiting to be born. My own story was now clear. The river stone in my pocket was the beginning. The library was my home. I was no longer a ghost. I was a keeper. I went to the center of the library, where the pedestal stood. The blank manuscript was gone. In its place, a single book rested on the stand. It was bound in a material I recognized. It was the same material as the book that told the story of Isolde, the architect of shadows. But this book was not dark and cool. It was luminous, filled with a faint inner light. On the cover, in raised, golden letters, was a single word. My name, Elias. I opened the book, my hand steady. The first page was blank, but as I watched, the polished river stone from my pocket began to glow, and the first word of my own story appeared. My life was not unwritten anymore. It was just beginning. It was not a life of unfulfilled potential, but a life of unlimited potential. A life that was waiting to be written. And I, Elias, the keeper of the unwritten, would be the one to write it. The library was no longer a place of quiet whispers. It was a place of roaring possibilities. And I, at last, was home.